Hi everybody, thanks for tuning in. So today we're going to go over a crack repair in quartz, and through this process we're going to use three different phases basically, which would be an extreme example of phase polishing quartz. So we're starting today with resin pad. We're starting with the resin pulsar pads 2, 4, 800, and then we're going to move into the Quartz Renew pads. It's the first time we've shown a process with the Quartz Renew pads. They've been out for a couple years now, but wanted to show you firsthand how they work, and then we're going to move into the final phase of using the Quartz Renew polish. Okay, so we're going to the quartz, the crack we have today is a little bit of lippage there, a little bit of height variance, approximately 1/64 of an inch. So we do have to start with grinding a little material down and going all the way back up to match the factory finish, and we're going to show you how we do that. Okay, so to show you the pads that we're going to use today prior to the final phase of using the Quartz Renew, again, this is a bit of an extreme example. We don't always need all these pads, but in the case of a crack or grinding a seam down, something like that, we're going to need resin pads to start out, as we're going to be hogging out material. So in this case we're using the pulsar pads. Okay, we're going to start with 200, go to 4, and then to 800, and then we're moving over to the Quartz Renew pads, okay, which are maybe new to some of you. They've been out for a couple years, and we're getting some great results with them. Probably the best quartz polishing pads on the market today. So there's a 1 through 4 process, and that's roughly the 1,000 to 3,000 grit range is what that would cover. So in case of a repair that's maybe just a scratch that you can't feel and don't really need to hog out material, I'd be starting with these pads. Okay, I wouldn't be starting here. The only reason we're starting here today is because we do have to hog out some material. Okay, so we're starting with the pulsar pads, going to the Quartz Renew pads 1 through 4, and then we'll regroup as far as what we do with the final process. Okay, so the crack that we're working on today is right here. Okay, you can see the crack overall is roughly probably 10-12 inches long, and most of our lippage is right here. It's actually coming into the sink opening. Okay, and realizing that the lighting is not ideal here, but we're going to try to show you as best we can. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and get started with the 200 grit and go from there. Okay, so we're starting out with just basically marking where the crack is located. Okay, I'm just going to run a line right along the crack so I have some guidance when I add some water to the area. I'm just going to mist it. Always want to make sure that there's plenty of water there. As soon as the pad starts to grab or squeak, you're getting too dry, and you want to make sure that you stop and add more water at that point. So I'm using the same the Metabo polisher. My RPMs are all the way down, okay, to 1, which on this machine is 700 RPMs. The slower I go basically means that my water will not evaporate as quickly, which is key here because I don't have a water feed. So I'm starting at 200 grit, and it's going to work my way along this crack line until I can't feel it anymore. Okay, so I finished my 200 grit. Basically polished this area down until you can't feel the crack line, and crack line's actually hard to detect at this point now. You can see. Alright, but you see, it's obviously we got a fair amount of hazing now from our 200 grit process, and now basically just need to work our way back up to make this repair area match our factory finish. Okay, so you can see from that angle now our hazy area from the 200 grit. We're now moving to the 400 grit pulsar pad. Everything's the same process. You can notice I have my area marked off just beyond my hazy area, so when I do put water down, I'm not working blind. I know exactly where my edge is, and I'm not making my repair area too big. As I go to each grit, I'm going to overlap my pad roughly a 1/4 inch past my mark until I'm removing the mark all the way around the perimeter. And during each grit, I'm going to go front to back, side to side, and that's when I change my grit. Okay, so now we've finished our 800 grit, or I'm sorry, 400 grit, and the sheen is definitely improving, as it will with each step. We obviously have a long way to go, so you can still see the edge of our repair versus the factory finish. There's a good look at it right there. Okay, so again, I've marked just beyond my my polishing area, so that when I wet the area again, I know exactly where I'm working, and as to not make my repair area too big. But at this point, it's very hard to detect any part of the crack that was there. So we've basically ground it down to be flush, and you can't even feel it. Okay, so there's a good look at the repair. Now we're going to move on to the 800 grit. So this is the results after the 800 pulsar pad, and you can see our sheen is definitely increasing quite a bit, and we're getting very close now. Again, I've marked off my area. You can see where it's just slightly off from our factory still, and we're just going to keep working our way up until we match it. So now we're going to start with the Quartz Renew pads, which again is designed to basically take any repair from this level up with ease. It'll actually handle damage that's worse than this. But again, it's more like a 1,000 to 3,000 grit range pad, and it's designed for using in the field to face polish quartz with minimal risk, as you would with a resin pad or a porcelain pad. Okay, so again, our area is right here. You can see in the picture it's still slightly hazier than our factory. Color appears a little lighter because of that. We're going to start with the Quartz Renew pads now. So this is the first step of 4. Okay, they're designed to be wet pads, and they're very thin, so it's very forgiving. In terms of cutting and so forth, it's almost impossible to cut the top with this type of pad, as it would be with the resin pad. It's not mandatory, but I do recommend using some kind of flexible backer, which even creates more forgiveness, in that if you do dip the polisher one way or the other, the pad will tend to move and keep the polishing pad flat on the surface in the meantime, as opposed to a hard pad. If you dip your polisher, it's going to dip the pad as well. So same process as all the other steps. Plenty of water. I'm keeping my RPMs all the way down, which is 700, and about medium pressure. I'm also going to overlap my mark area just as I did on all the other steps. Okay, we finished our first step with using the Quartz Renew pads, and as you may notice from the last frame, while our sheen is may actually be slightly lower now, the Quartz Renew pads have a finer scratch pattern, so it's an important step in the transition. But one thing you may notice for sure is that we were more of a glassy finish in the last frame, and now we're starting to get more of our texture back, which is key to restoring the factory finish, especially with a color like this, because the texture, the snakeskin texture, is more prominent than, say, a fine grain like a solid color. Okay, so we're introducing our texture back in, and now we're going to move on to the second step, the second pad, and our sheen will improve as we go along. Okay, so here's our second pad, the Quartz Renew, and same process as before. Alright, here's after our second step of the Quartz Renew pads. Okay, and you can see our sheen is increasing again, but now we have the texture. The texture is matching very well, as you can see across the repair area and the factory. In the reflection, you can see the texture is very consistent. Okay, so there's the third pad. Yellow pad, same process. Okay, here's a look after our third Quartz Renew pad. You can see our finish is starting to get very close now. We have a little bit of hazing still. We have one more pad to go, and then we're going to move into the Quartz Renew polish to match the factory finish. Okay, so there's a number 4 pad, the blue pad. Okay, so we finished our 4 steps with the Quartz Renew polishing pads, and you can see our finish is getting very close at this point, and we're ready to move on to the Quartz Renew polish. You can see towards the back end of our repair, for sure, there's still a little bit of hazing, and that's what the Quartz Renew polish is going to do. It's going to make up that difference that pads typically can't do. Take it from that slight bit of hazing to matching the factory finish. Okay, so just to recap what we did up to this point, we started with the resin pads, the pulsar pads, and the reason we used those in this case is because we had to take some material off. Okay, so whenever that's the case, whether it's a crack or polishing a seam or something like that, you must start with a pad like this. The pulsar pads work well because the resin is very soft, which means they're going to bleed quickly, but also means they're exposing fresh diamonds constantly, and that's what we're looking for in a good quartz polishing pad. Then we moved into the Quartz Renew pads. These were designed for the majority of repairs that you would run into in the field, like light abrasions, scratches that you can't feel, things like that. 1,000 to 3,000 grit range. These are meant to use in the field with no water feed, and they're great because they're low risk. Okay, so we went from the pulsar pads to the Quartz Renew pads, and now we still have a little bit of hazing left, and we're going to finish that off with the Quartz Renew polish. And I know a lot of you have been using the polish out there. It's been around for about 4 years now, and it's had great success with it. But just to recap that, there's a 3-step process with the Quartz Renew. The first step, which is called the snakeskin revealer, that is designed for adding texture to the surface, and that's it. It is not intended to be a polish. In this case, when we used our Quartz Renew pads, as I mentioned earlier, it added texture back into it by itself. So we do not need the snakeskin revealer in this case, because we don't need to add texture. Now, there's 2 ways to get to the final finish line, so to speak, with a repair. You can finish the whole repair with just resin pads if you prefer. In that case, you would go to 1500 and then to the Quartz Renew polish, as opposed to using the Quartz Renew pads in between. When you take that route, however, you will end up with a more glassy finish, and your texture will not be there. So it's going to be almost like you're setting a piece of glass into the surface, and it will stand out for that reason. Now in that case, and this is going to be based on your assessment and the practice that you put in to feel out this product and where it can work for you. But in that case, when you have a glassy finish, you must start with the snakeskin revealer to put that texture back in before you go after the hazing that's there. In this case, like I said, we already have texture, so I'm skipping the first step. I'm going right to the second step, which is the resin polish, and then the final polish, and that'll be our final product. Okay, so put our resin polish down to start minimizing the hazing that's there. This will get us probably 95% to the finished product, and then we'll go on to the final polish phase. But the resin polish goes on with the green foam pad. Each step has its own applicator, so we're going to use the green foam. Everything else is the same. Our RPMs are going to be all the way down, and we're going to move slowly across the surface to let the product do its work. Okay, so we finished our resin polish phase, and you can see still slight hazing there. But we're slowly getting closer to matching the finish, and that's what we expect to happen on this final phase. Okay, so we've reached our final step. We're going to use the final polish phase of Quartz Renew. That goes on with the white foam pad. Okay, so there's our result after the use of the final polish. Went over a couple times to blend it out. You can see our finish is pretty consistent at this point.